Sorry. Okay, I'm sharing my screen now. Yes.
Yep.
Apologies. Can I go back? I wanted to show you my, let's see. Okay. Okay. Let me go back just to make, I have one point to make about the session, which is there was about 20 water bills that were introduced, and if I have this right, about 13 got a hearing, and then just 5 passed. And um, there's a hindrance about water bills. There's so much turnover in the legislature. Um, Water law is confusing, it's contentious, it's not typically what legislators have a background in. And then on top of that, the Natural Resources Committee tends to be assigned, a lot of new legislators tend to be assigned to the Natural Resources Committee. So there's a lot of new members, turnover. The chair on both the Senate side and the Assembly side has been new every session for the last several sessions. And so this is an important factor in what bills are brought forward, how the debate is run, what passes. And it's kind of a hindrance in that setting. So that's just important background, I think. And so I want this slide, um, I just want to really briefly summarize where these water bills come from every session. There's really three kind of pathways that bills originate from. One is executive branch preparation. So we as a division often have a bunch of ideas about things in statute that could change that would make our process more efficient, achieve the objectives of water law or resource protection in the ways that the public is interested in. We have ideas. And what happens is from the governor's office, the department gets a certain number of bills that can be brought forward. So we'll come up with a bunch of our ideas. It's got to be vetted through at the department level, along with all the other divisions within DCNR. And then the ones that make that cut then also have to be approved and supported by the governor's office as an executive branch bill. So it gets kind of whittled down. But that's the process. And the timing, this is all happening the year prior to session. Those bills are pre-filed in November. The interesting thing, or the kind of new thing for me this last year, was that we had license to talk about the different ideas that we had publicly and in stakeholder groups prior to those bills being the governor approved bills being public. So I really like that. It was advantageous to vet these different ideas, get people understanding where it was coming from, what the pros and cons are, whether or not they supported it, and then by the time we get to session, a lot of people are already familiar with these concepts. So that was good. The second category is the interim committee process. Like during the interim session, there's still stuff going on. The natural resources committees are having these interim sessions. At the end of those sessions, they're soliciting ideas for BDRs, and some of those get adopted, and then they're introduced by a legislator during the session. And those also have the advantage of having a lot of public consideration prior to the session. And then the third category is each legislator has a certain number of bills that they can bring, and of their choice, and it might be in cooperation with with a constituent or their own backgrounds or whatever it might be. And so those are often the surprise because we typically don't see what the content is until it's formally introduced or when we're asked if there might be a fiscal impact. And so those can sometimes be challenging because we don't know what the intent is. And it's often a surprise that there's a fiscal note on it when that wasn't foreseen because we just don't have the capacity to absorb new programs or procedures unless we're going to eliminate something else. So those are the three general categories of where water bills come from. There were these are the two bills that were division bills. And I'll briefly summarize these. The first was all about dam safety. So the dam safety statutes were adopted in early 1950s. One of the early state dam safety statutes haven't really been updated since then, but the industry has advanced a lot and industry standards and practice have evolved. So really we see this as just updating statute to match how things actually happen in what the standards are in the world of dam safety. It was pretty much practical and procedural. There wasn't a lot of opposition, and it ended up passing unanimously. The one little twist was the introduction of FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So there's an exemption in the dam safety statutes for federal agencies who do their own inspections and operation and maintenance of dams, like the Bureau of Reclamation. And the proposal was to add an exemption for FERC licensed dams, because FERC does inspections too, but they don't own and operate dams. So there was a little bit of hesitancy on our part. But really, actually, it really only applied to one project. But the interesting thing was that's the kind of thing that could kill what otherwise is just like a common sense update to statute. So the second bill had more interesting debate around it, and this was about federal claims of vested water rights. Oh, wait. Let me pause for a second. Let me go back and just make a couple points about dam safety, because this is good for just context. I'll be brief. But one of the things that we brought up was dam storage fees. So all the non-irrigation dams that don't have irrigation rights in them pay this annual storage fee based on volume. And it's about $1.5 million that goes right into the general fund. And this originated from a recommendation at the national level for dam safety programs to help support dam safety. And the way that we route it now, it doesn't do that. And so I've been supporting the concept of using that money to either do the thorough engineering risk assessments of high hazard dams, or creating some kind of like a low interest loan program where dam owners could have access to funds to do expensive dam repairs, or something like that would directly support dam safety in the state. I'm still supporting that idea. I think that's the intent of the funding, but that didn't really get traction. And then the second point that I want to make about state-owned dams. There's a number of state agencies like NDOW, NDOT, state parks, DWR owns one, but that own just a small number of dams. And the difficulty is that it's maintaining and not operating so much, but maintaining and permitting dams and it is kind of a specialty. So I'm also supportive of all those state-owned dams being housed under the same agency, because it just would be a lot more efficient and it would just take a couple of people. The challenge is finding where that would be. We say not us because we're the regulator. We shouldn't also be the owner. But that's the sticking point. But that's, I think, another good idea around dams. Okay. Now to Senate Bill 31. So the division's perspective, this got pretty contentious because it has to do with this deadline of 2027 for everybody to file a claim of vested right. If you are, if you already have a claim filed, you don't need to do anything. If you're the holder of a decreed right, you don't need to do anything. This is just if you think you have a claim or you have a claim that hasn't even been submitted yet, this is the deadline. I think it's a really necessary thing. But it's kind of funny because federal agencies have limited, this only applies to a limited extent for federal agencies. There's an exemption for reserved claims, to federal reserved claims to this deadline, but this current statute is silent on federal vested claims. So the same thing happened in Oregon, and it went to the appeals court. The appeals court ruled, and so what our proposal was here was to be consistent with what the appeals court said, with the intent of avoiding a lawsuit after this deadline, and just resolving this up front. There was a lot of opposition, and it was basically principled opposition to why do we have this deadline that applies to everybody except the United States of America? Why do they get special rules? I totally understand that, but once an adjudication is started, we really just treat every claimant the same, and we don't really make that distinction. If you're claiming to that you have a vested water right, you're subject to the same kind of scrutiny and requirement to demonstrate that that's valid. So that led to a lot of debate. Again, it was very principled, and a lot of the discussion went to, well, we should just postpone this deadline. And I think we really, really need to keep this deadline. The reason for setting this was primarily to preserve this historic record and where we still have records, and then to know where claims are so that they can be protected. And then the other thing about this deadline is, one of the things that takes so long about adjudications is the process of making that call for proofs and trying to notice every possible claimant on a particular system and giving them enough time to put their claims together. That's the most time-consuming part of an adjudication. So if we already had that pool of claimants, then the adjudication process could go a lot faster. With regard to the Federal Reserve claims, almost all of those are public water reserve claims for stock water on public lands. And there's a couple of adjudications right now that are in review process or appeal. The Diamond Valley is being appealed. And what I'm hoping to get out of that is some clarity about exactly what we should be doing. If we've made our own interpretation about what we're supposed to do with federal public water reserve claims, and if we're not doing it right, we need that feedback from the Supreme Court to tell us how it should be done so that we can do it efficiently. And I'm hoping to get that back so that we can move forward with these more quickly in the future. The other thing about federal claims of vested right, there are very, very few. There's only like a tiny handful of vested claims that have been filed by federal agencies. So my message to the federal agencies, if you think you have a vested claim on something. For instance, if you've acquired an old ranch or something that doesn't already have a claim and water's been in continuous use, put the effort in now to finding those and just getting the claim filed. And that could, that could just save us a lot of time. Just comply with this deadline voluntarily. And I think we could avoid a lawsuit in the future. Okay. No questions. So a lot of water bills come up, and this is what I started talking about. I talked about this at NWRA in January, and this was part of my presentation to new legislators or the committees of this is how the division looks at any kind of water bill that's proposed. Sometimes I like these ideas, sometimes I don't. We try to be really objective and understand where it's coming from and use these kind of, again, objective standards to give some meaningful, helpful input for legislators as they consider these ideas, and really look for are there fatal flaws? What would it really do? Are there costs associated? What, unintended impacts? That's what we try to do. And so this is to help set the stage as I go through these different bills that were considered over the session. And I'll come back to this with some reflections at the end. So here's a couple bills that did pass that are good to know about. One of the things that these have in common is that it's easy to understand what it would do, at least on the surface. So the first one on the left is part of a much larger bill that was a committee bill, and covers a lot of topics in Las Vegas Basin. But just this one element I want to point out regarding domestic wells, that in the Las Vegas Basin only, new domestic wells are now prohibited if they're within 1,250 feet of an existing water line. And that's effective now. It's simple concept, simple to understand. There are, I think there are going to be, this will have severe impact on particular lot owners that are in that zone. There's re-drills, reconstructions, restoration of existing domestic wells is still okay, as long as you, let me write this down, because Christy, will you do me a favor and write in the question the rule about septics? And it's exactly what, and I hesitate because I don't want to say it wrong. And our Southern Nevada Bureau branch office is, if you have questions about this or this comes up, call that office, because they have done a lot of good work really figuring out exactly how to inform people what this means for them. Okay, second bill that passed, pretty straightforward. Guzzlers, which are water sources for wildlife, they can now be 40,000 gallons instead of 20,000 gallons, and a little further away from the source. This is a tiny amount of water. It's like I think a tenth of an acre foot. It barely registers, and that passed easily. And then third bill that passed has to do with channel clearance funds, which is a program in Chapter 532, which provides funding for channel clearance and increases the amount that fund can hold. Which for us, that means that when we're asking for contingency funds, we have to ask for less frequent. Oh, okay. Okay, now this is a bill that passed, and this requires a little bit, or warrants a little bit more discussion, because it got a lot more attention. There was a ton of support for this. There were two bills that ended up being identical, that built this, so we now have this water rights retirement program in statute. So the idea is that this account can hold funds, and then those funds will be used to purchase groundwater rights and permanently retire them, where they will still be recognized as a commitment against the resource, but they cannot be used. It wasn't funded, and it sunsets in 10 years, but there's a lot of support for this, and I think it was one of the accomplishments that I really recognize here is that it brought a lot of different types of people and different kinds of interests together in agreement. So the state engineer's office is separate from this program. It goes through the DCNR, the director's office. So I haven't been involved in what happens next and how to enact this program. What we have done is just created a simple process of receiving and documenting any water rights that are retired. And I guess the significance thing, and it's good to have it in statute, where the difference between retirement is that, like I said, it's an active water right that is not in use, which is different from a relinquishment, which is an active water right, but it represents a real use, like typically a domestic well, or say, withdrawal or an abandonment, which is an inactive right that represents no use. So that's where the retirement is a new status that we didn't previously have. So this concept has come up in the last couple of sessions. First in 2021, when it was actually part of a division bill, and there was at that time there was opposition to this concept, and I found that to be convincing, and we withdrew this idea at the time, and the opposition that I found convincing was that by creating this program, or by having a state run a public buyback, say, of groundwater rights, creates this monetary value for water rights. And the concern was that, well, that it sort of interferes with the normal water rights process. And if you don't need the water, it should then be available for whoever does need the water. And this is going to incentivize people to hang on to their water rights artificially, even though they don't have a use for it. But 2 sessions later, those concerns, I think, were sort of vetted, and so this is now a program. But one of the additions that I thought was really smart at the end was to limit this to groundwater rights that are certificated or decreed. So it really does represent a water right that's in use, or was recently at least in use. And I do see examples, locations where this could be used in helpful ways. Maybe less so for big regional issues, but it would be interesting to see what comes out of this. And thank you, Christy, for adding this clarity. Replacement, rehabilitation, or deepening is approved if the property has a valid septic permit. Okay, thank you. Again, if that applies to you or your clients, and call the Las Vegas office. Okay, now I want to, let me check my time. It's 3:30. I roughly planned on an hour presentation and allowing for questions. So that's what I'll try to stick with. And that means I'm going to be pretty brief going through these. I don't want to belabor these unless someone wants to go back into it. There's about, I think I have 3 slides that summarize water bills that did not pass. And I'll briefly summarize. So the first 2 here had to do with water conservation, which is very much a worthwhile subject, but it's interesting because sometimes the definition of conservation gets lost, and that can be a problem. But there's some truth to the whole use it or lose it framework disincentivizes conservation. So what can we do to turn that around and incentivize or promote conservation in that water law framework? So this first one, 89, it got a hearing, I think maybe a couple of hearings, but did not pass. And it would allow water right holders, irrigation water right holders, to move water rights into this non-use status. Essentially, it's kind of like, and maybe this sounds critical, but it's basically giving yourself a voluntary extension of time, which is then renewable for another 5 years. And that was the part that I couldn't really reconcile. Like if the intent is to change the rules around extensions of time, then we should do that within that portion of statute. That would be, I think, more palatable rather than create a whole new program. So the next one, AB 134, is kind of a similar. It had the same issue with the word conservation. This would have been a more significant program or new set of rules that the state engineer's staff would have to apply. And I don't think this one got a hearing. That one would have been, I think, really difficult to implement. So the next one, AB 109, was about non-consumptive geothermal use and the requirement for non-consumptive geothermal to get a water right. So right now they're basically exempt. If all these big geothermal plants that are pumping and re-injecting don't have water rights for that volume of water that is circulating. They generally have some water rights for their consumptive portion. But I think where this one came from is that there's so many cases around the state where geothermal projects, even though they don't have water rights, they do have an impact on the aquifer, and often at the surface, drying up hot springs or geysers, things of that nature that do have water rights. And the process, there's no real recourse through DWR. It goes to the EIS, BLM process if they have some kind of mitigation parameters in there. So it's an interesting problem. I think it's going to get worse. I expect that to be a topic in future sessions, but there was a lot of pushback from the industry. And there was also the other piece here is that when there's geothermal exploration, it's something like 90%, 95% of those exploration attempts are not successful. And to have to go through the water right process before you even do the exploration work was a legitimate critique, I guess, from the industry and also from us, because there's a lot of those, and it's really hard to evaluate. What are the impacts of pumping and recirculating from 6,000 feet? Where we really don't know. what's happening. But really good and long-term regional monitoring, I do think that is something that needs to be improved upon with new geothermal projects, even though they don't have consumptive water rights. Okay, and then the last one here was a proposal which came from Sullivan and Gurr, which is totally exactly what we want to do too, is we need funding to support hydrologic studies and update our basic understanding of hydrogeology around the state. That didn't get a hearing, but I was very supportive of that proposal. Okay. Groundwater boards, AB 363. This is another concept that has been introduced and debated over the last 3 sessions. The specific content has varied from one session to next, but the basic idea is to have a board of individuals that is for a designated groundwater basin that would have some involvement in decisions about water law for that basin. And I think the fault here was defining exactly what that relationship would be between the local board and the state agency that is responsible for carrying out water law. How that would exactly how that would be different from what counties or yeah, I guess counties can already do, or regional water authorities that are in place that are, you know, really active with water law. How would this be different? So there was a hearing, at least one hearing on that, but it didn't advance. And then the last two here, AB 265 and AB 419, they had some similarities in these were, you know, when I looked at these were two that were legislator introduced. So I hadn't seen these. These ideas were never brought to our attention before the session. And that could have been really helpful, because the way that I read these, they were kind of an airing of grievances and almost kind of like a punishment for the division or various things that were criticisms of the agency. That's in honesty, that's mostly how I took these. I guess rather than having a realistic proposal for how we could speed up processes, make things more efficient, you know, notify public what those concerns were, which I tend to agree with in most parts, but they need to be realistic and they need to come with funding. So generally these, you know, they talked about having deadlines, having more hearings, pre-meetings, things that would support applicants who are trying to get their water right applications acted on more quickly. And it wasn't totally malicious. And like I said, there's a lot of things in there that in principle I fully agree with, and we're working on incrementally. We just have limited funding and staff, and we're constrained by the letter of the law when it you know, for a water law that in some cases is, you know, not well suited for dealing with issues of the modern era. So the AB 419 did get a hearing, but neither of these have been asked. Okay. And let's see. So AB 485 had to do with basin assessments. And this is when it didn't end up getting a hearing, but the final version of this, I really liked it. So a lot of you know, but about a third of our budget is supported by these basin assessments, which is generally water right holders pay an annual assessment. it supports work that benefits those areas. Compared to most Western states, the rate of assessments in Nevada is dirt cheap. And I know that's it's not necessarily fair to compare it, but I can't help saying it. And for a large water right holder, it can be a pretty sizable dollar amount. It's not, it's noticeable. So it's generally the rates are generally like less than $1 per acre foot per year. So it can add up. But the thing about these assessments, so where they originate in statute can be a little confusing. There's different rules for decrees, for underground, for groundwater rights, whether or not an area is predominantly for agriculture or not. So municipal basins are assessed differently. And like if you live in a municipal area in Vegas, Carson, Reno, you get this on your annual tax bill from the county. It's like $1 or $2 per year is from this assessment. So there tends to be some questions, and we're often invited out to county commissioner meetings to talk about what these assessments do, why we're raising it 5 cents per acre foot, and what they're going to get for that. And so we always have staff go out and attend these meetings. We put a lot of work into getting these things right. We went through an audit a few years ago, and that was reassuring because once they understood what we were doing and how we do it, they didn't have much of a critique. Their main critique was that we should charge more, but really we don't want to hold accrue cash on hand in these accounts. We want to keep it really really steady. And so again, I guess the concept here with this basin assessment bill was to do these things here, and I was supportive, as far as keeping good track of public funds. I thought that was a good proposal. So that might be back next session. The other piece, the last bullet on that one, initially there was $1 million appropriation request for the Nevada Water Initiative, and that got cut out at the end. But that was one of the reasons that I think it got delayed. Okay, and then the last one, water rights relinquishment and permit cancellations. The key thing about this one that I'll say is that the concept was that if you have a water right that has been canceled and then rescinded, the cancellation was rescinded, so you get it back, that it would maintain its priority date. Because in statute now, it says quite clearly that if there's a cancellation and it gets rescinded, you get a new priority date, which was the date that it was the date that it's I'm blanking on that. But anyway, you get a current new date. That's basically when you got it rescinded. And so it is kind of a harsh rule, and some I understand where that's coming from. My testimony was, well, okay, we get it, but if there's no sort of penalty if you lose these deadlines for extensions of time and so on, what's to keep people filing things on time, and what does that say to the people who do keep all these, who are on top of deadlines, or who are actually using water that they're permitted for and not just continuing to file extensions? So anyway, that had a hearing but didn't pass. Thank you, Christy. Priority date becomes the date the petition was filed is the new priority date. Okay. Couple thoughts, just takeaways after the session, and it kind of goes back to that earlier slide of my 5 different criteria that I try to use to evaluate ideas. The proposals did not fully address the root causes of the issue. Instead, sometimes it's just a reaction to a point of frustration. Second, a lot of proposals that came forward are costly. And so we spent a lot of time putting together fiscal notes for concepts that would in some cases we'd have to double our staff to be able to do this, and it took us weeks in some cases to really go through the detailed analysis, because that's what we have to do to evaluate okay, if this were law, how would we do it? And so that's a process to be aware of, but that's what happens when these things come up. We also had we had a team of staff that evolved or rotated a little bit, but when different proposals come in, we sit down with different individuals that have expertise in different areas and just think, okay, where is this coming from? What are they trying to accomplish? What are the pros and cons? If this were law, how would we do it? And those are pretty fun discussions, because sometimes, like I said, there's good ideas that come out of this, but often the takeaway was, man, if we'd known about this a year ago, we could have worked with the proponent and sort of worked through some of that and hopefully come up with a better outcome. So that kind of gets my later points on this slide. And so now I do want to turn a little bit to things that we're working on as a division, different priorities, and there's a continuum here, because some of it is related to things we hear at session that people aren't necessarily aware of that we're working on, or it's just taking too long. But first, I do want to point out some budget, just to give you an overview. So all the budget stuff in this legislative session was pretty flat. If you were tracking it, I think you got that message. So we didn't really have any significant changes in our budget. Some of the things that we asked for, it just wasn't supported. There wasn't funding to be able to do that. One of the changes at the department is this consolidation of IT and GIS, and there's a little bit of a trend, I'd say, within DCNR to combine things with the idea of being more efficient, or sharing resources. Generally a good idea. It's we run into bumps because so many of these divisions have, even though sometimes we're permitting the same stuff, and I know from an external perspective, it's like, why doesn't DWR know what BMRR is doing? And we make efforts to do that, but still sometimes things can slip, and we're governed by different rules, different statutes, different objectives, but we're constantly trying to make that better. So another point here is that our staffing level at DWR has been basically the same. It's gone up a little bit, down a little bit, but for the last 20 years, our staff, we've had the same number of staff. Last bullet here that is from the capital improvement program. Yeah, there was a chunk of money that was allocated to South Fork Dam, which DWR owns and maintains and regulates. But this is money that went to Public Works to do this engineering work on the emergency spillway and outlet gates, which is much needed repair work. It's a big job, really has to be taken care of. And and I like this money going to public works. They are used to managing big engineering contracts. They're set up to do that. We've done it in the past, but it just comes up every once in a while, and it takes a lot of time and energy and a kind of a refresher on how you do this accurately, working with contractors and bidding things and stuff like that. So that's a good outcome. Okay, so now looking forward into this interim or this next sort of biennium. The way we're looking at it is what can we do to keep working towards, finding efficiencies, working with what we've got and still adhering to Nevada water law. And these are some sort of driving goals or central principles that we keep pushing. Data collection, building good science, baseline foundation, automating processes, improving our ability to have digital submittals and so on. And I've got another slide on that coming up. And science-driven decisions so we can make defensible, accurate, lasting decisions. We're in the middle of this 5-year strategic plan. So and I bring this up because it drove both what our budget requests and our legislative requests were in the 2025 session. And I anticipate will also be a basis for what we see in the 2027 session. We have a number of these, it's like improving our efficiencies, filling gaps where we're expected to do things, we just don't have the capacity. Good public outreach that's informative and helpful, staff development. And then these last three at the bottom are sort of longer term initiatives that are more forward looking. And these are all things that we were able to use ARPA funding to get off the ground or give some more momentum, and that goes through. So we're still operating with that. That goes through 2026. And that gives you a sense of kind of what our priorities are. And then I'll talk about a couple of these in a little bit more detail, because this is what I'm talking about now. This is kind of a preview for what you're going to be hearing in public meetings or from this division over the next couple of years. So I'm starting now, or it's not new. This is the same stuff we've been pushing for the last few years. But Nevada Water Initiative, this is working with the USGS and DRI to really build out our understanding of the hydrogeology in Nevada. We've got the ability and the expertise to really put this information and these capabilities together in a way that we can actively use this and apply this science to make efficient and accurate administrative decisions that affect people throughout the state. I think this is a fundamental role of this agency, and this continues to be a high priority. This whole phase 1 that we've done has been on time and over delivering, and there's a lot of enthusiasm there. The next phase that we're looking at is focusing on the Carson Desert area and the South Central Marshes area, which are in need of revised understanding of the water budgets and also under a lot of development pressures. We don't have any secured funding yet beyond 2026, but we're actively pursuing that, and we do have some promising things in the works. Yeah. Secondly, we're continuing to modernize how our office does its job. We're so paper-based, and we have all these hard file records that go back over 100 years. We have a really active team that's scanning, digitizing, cataloging stuff, and this is preserving this historic records that are some of these onion skin papers that we only have one copy of this thing in the permit file, and we just need to back this up before we lose anything. Creating procedures so people can submit, so you can submit maps online. You can look at the maps digitally. It's the exact same thing that we're working with on our side. Fees can be paid. Forms can be submitted. We've got some of that in established, and more is coming. We'll have an updated map submittal guidelines that's allowing for contemporary mapping and surveying techniques. It doesn't have to go back to how it used.
Okay, so let's give it one more minute.
Hi.
Hi.
Did I
Okay.
screen?
So your screen froze, and then you're stopped sharing your screen. So there we go.
Share.
Okay, so I see I don't see a slide number.
Slide.
Yep, digitization and
Mhm.
modernization. Okay, that is where it stopped.
Okay. So is everybody still on?
Yeah.
Okay.
And let me just double check. 40, yep. Yes, they are.
Um, and did it just cut off? I don't want to say this all again. If I
No, it was only off for like 20 seconds, if that.
Okay, and I was talking about the database update.
Okay.
I'll just start with that because I'm excited about that. We really need it for because everybody uses this, both our staff and the public, on a daily basis.
Okay.
And
And then we
what's that?
do have a question that came in too, just so you know.
I don't see it.
Okay, so Roger McGregor asked, being understaffed and needing help, is there something the mining industry can do to provide third-party support through additional funds and or committed experienced consultants funded by industry?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And it kind of comes up now and then. Like it's come up with adjudications where said, we really want our basin to be adjudicated. What if we just pay for it and hire a consultant to get it done? It's generally we've arrived at that's just not going to work. Because um because I guess if you're going to have a third party do it, it's really clearly has to be someone who doesn't have a vested interest in the outcome of decisions. That's part of the reasoning. And then secondly, there's a certain kind of expertise that just takes years to accumulate. So it's hard to just throw people at the problem and solve it. And we have that same kind of problem with in the legislature. Like, how many more people do you need? And it's not necessarily about people. It's about um, um, developing that expertise and being able to um, see the spectrum of how this division with this sort of complex water law that has all these different angles, how you can effectively and efficiently and objectively arrive at a solution. So and as far as funding, there, something that an example of where we've been able to do that effectively is with dam inspections. And we did this during COVID. It was really helpful from the mining industry, where we recognize that a lot of the mines have very capable consultants or in-house people who know exactly how to do good dam inspections. And from a public safety standpoint, very high standards. So our staff don't necessarily need to do that, and that was helpful in COVID. And that's an example. So I guess I'm open to that, but it's been a little tricky, or it has some problems. So thank you for bringing it up. Oh, I see. Thanks, Roger. Let's talk afterwards. Okay, last point on this digitization slide is that QR code is a public survey for our new database. Comment about the state water plan. So this is something that we started a few years ago, and we had some staff in, I think, 2019, kind of specifically to do this. Where we're at right now is we're under contract with DRI to focus on some big questions that we don't really have the expertise to do regarding demographic and economic projections for water demands. That is also funded by ARPA. We also have new staff that are in our planning section that are taking up where our previous staff left off. This is we're also thinking about, like, how do you create a water plan that's statewide helpful, it's supportive of county or city water resource plans. It's a living document. It's not just a final product that gets overlooked. That we could, that would be functional and helpful. So I like where the priorities are. But the next thing coming for that is to reinitiate the engagement that we've had with a lot of public participation, or advisory groups that were already established on that. So that's an upcoming priority. I have to mention conjunctive management. This is, continues to be one of the, I see as one of the biggest challenges of really moving forward with water resource management. The connectivity between surface water and groundwater sources. It's not just us by any means, it's throughout the West. There's these complexities that there's just nothing easy about this. But why it matters, it's critical to protect senior water rights, conserve resources, supporting beneficial uses, all these sort of fundamental objectives. But I mean, the basic principles, too much groundwater pumping near surface water sources is ultimately going to drive springs, eliminate base flow. And how do we manage that? And the Humboldt River, what's going on out there is for us, it's really, it's a priority. It's breaking new ground, and that's a lot of my attention goes there. And I should say, it's not just the Humboldt. There's good work being done on Carson, and throughout the state, really. Death Valley flow system. Every region is different, so it's hard. When we're talking about legislative stuff, we reach a ceiling where it's statewide, changing statewide laws is not going to solve the problem, where it's you got to really treat each region realistically from a hydrogeologic sense, and from how water is used, and what the water rights are, and so on. And then So there's a number of regulations that are at some point in the cycle. Some of this came out of legislation that or executive orders that required us to do regulation. We as an agency are really regulation light, and there aren't very many NACs that govern what we do. It's mostly, dam safety and well drilling, procedural things that are governed by NEC, and the hearing procedures. But anyway, these are the ones that are upcoming. So the well driller's license, we adopted temporary regs, and this was in part in response to executive order from the governors to look for opportunities for reciprocity or improving employment opportunities. These will expire, so we're going to have to adopt permanent regs, and that is in process. And there's a couple of, I think, pretty minor changes from the temporary regs there captured the main issues that we were having with that. Secondly, hearing regs. We've had some public workshops on these a year or two ago, and we're picking these up again, and those are now ready for an adoption hearing. And the language there has been public for some time. All these are on our website. On the bulletin board tab, there's a regulations section that gives the status of all these. The third one, extension of time. This is big because it affects probably the most people. So in 20, oh gosh. So this is part of the process. About 3 years ago, we adopted these extension of time regs, and that came out of the legislative process with the plan to revisit those in 3 years, and we're about at that 3-year point. So we had this meeting in I think it was December of 2024, if I'm not mistaken, to really solicit input on how those have gone and how it's working for people. And so between our staff and all the input that we got, we're piecing this together. There's things that we can do that aren't even regs. There's some things that we can't do because it's in statute, but we're gonna this, if you're involved in this, stay tuned, because we're going to be having a public workshop very soon to resume that and move forward, because we've got some good things in the works here that I think are going to be really responsive to the public feedback that we got, and I'm really optimistic about that. And then the last one, alleged violations, or AVs. This was one where when the governor's executive order came out a couple years ago, that was requiring all state agencies to take a look at their regs and find out where you could streamline stuff and get rid of unnecessary regs. Every state agency had to reply. So we said, these AV regs in 532, they don't work that well. It takes a lot of time on our staff, and we really think these could be improved without giving it a whole lot of thought. And then they came back and they're like, great, get rid of them and rewrite them. And so we just haven't really had the capacity to do that, but we're going to dive into that. And it's a sticky issue, because really we want to focus on education and compliance with water law, and not de-emphasize the being punitive and issuing fines and that sort of thing. But the procedure that we go through it could definitely be better. So that's a little bit more in the future, but not too distant future. Okay. And this is my last slide before just opening it up to more questions. Um, some thoughts, or going forward with some takeaways, I suppose. That so we have some very complex water issues in such an arid state, growing in population, growing in water demand, kind of messy water law, pretty small agency. And when we're talking about legislature, these big issues are not easily resolved because of the makeup of the legislature, the complexity of the issues, all the history. And I think one key takeaway is that legislative proposals really need to be vetted well to have any kind of chances of success. It takes a lot of time and effort, and there's a lot of good ideas, but if these ideas are going to the legislature, we want some good outcome from that. And there's some frustration there because we put a ton of effort into that, and a lot of it is just informing people of why something would have unintended consequences. It's that way. This division needs adequate resources and capacity to really be responsive and progressive and kind of set up the state for the future. And my last point is public engagement and participation is really essential for achieving long-term water security. So I appreciate everybody's involvement and participation and attendance today. And that's my closing thought. And it's 4:15. Certainly have time for some questions if there's something you want to ask.
So we do have a question from Laurel Saito. How many bills can a division put forward each legislative session?
It's different every year. This year the department could put forward 5, and 3 of those were DWR bills. In the past, it's been a few more than that, but that gives you a sense of it's not very many. And I think that's just up to the governor and the governor's staff. They just make a decision about how much they can, handle across all these different state agencies and how much capacity they have.
Anybody else have any questions? You can use the raise hand option at the bottom of your screen, or you can type it in.
And if you think of something afterwards that you don't want to bring up now, I'll make time if you wanted to email me or something like that.
What are your potential funding sources for the NWI?
Federal appropriations or federal earmarks. That's kind of the most promising direction. We've been talking to the delegation about the benefits for the state, and talking about there's definitely a recognition of water issues throughout the West, and I think the value proposition here is a good one because we're not seeking that much money. So we get a lot of positive feedback, so we keep going back to that, and that's the main thing. I'll say the other thing that we've been talking about is there's a provision for water right applicants. If there's not enough information to make an informed decision about a water right application, 533-368 allows for the state engineer to require the applicant to pay for that study so that we have good data. And So what we're talking about is, you know, that type of a thing achieves the same objective. And it might be, you know, a piece of how we could sort of continue to keep our focus on getting a larger understanding of the hydrogeology, having some of that funding come from future water users through their application process, and in the long term, benefiting both that Boulder and the region. So that's another idea. Um, yeah, and then, you know, state funding too continues to be a good option. We have funding through up until the next session. So I think it's important. This state is so dry, and we put very little investment into water resources. And I think that um, that's going to have to change, and we'll have to, you know, recognize the value.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions? Okay, we do need to just ask who two people are. Astorla. Astorla. We just need to know if you could type in your Q&A who you are so we can get your certificate of attendance to you. And I think there's one more as well. And then the other one is a email address, jcatsludge at. So we just need to, if you could type in, if you wouldn't mind typing in your name into the Q&A, we can get a certificate of attendance to you. Thank you, thank you. Okay, does anybody have any questions? You can use the raise hand or you can type it in. And Astorla, if you could type in who the two people are that are there, that would be great into the Q&A. Thank you for answering so quickly. Okay, well, Adam's presentation will be posted on the NWRA website sometime either tomorrow or this weekend. It will be in PDF format, and you can go to the NWRA website at nvwra.org, use the events tab, and then choose the past events option in the drop down menu. Sorry. And you will receive a certificate of attendance in an email form in an email after this webinar ends. You will also have a certificate of attendance. I'm so sorry, an evaluation survey. And if you could complete and return that evaluation survey, it would be most appreciated. If you have questions that come up after this webinar, you can send them to me or you can send them directly to Adam, and we will try to get you some answers next week sometime. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Adam, thank you for this time, this information, for joining us today as well.
Bye,
All right,
everybody.
everybody. Okay, I guess we'll let you go. Enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so Lauren, do you see who Storla is? Astorla?
Yeah, I wrote both of those down, and then I wrote John Collins down for the J Cat Sludge.
Oh, is that who that was? Where did you find that? I couldn't see that. Oh, it's probably further.
If
Okay.
you scroll down in the Q&A.
Okay. All right. I got a little sidetracked there. I think I told him certificate of attendance like 4 times because in my mind I was thinking I gotta get all these converted to PDF now. Okay, let's see. Alrighty. So I am going to send you what I'm finding in her laptop for certificate of attendance. That one in PDF worked when I sent it to you, but now I can't figure out how I did it.
That's
Or where I
okay.
found it. But
That's
everything
okay.
she has 64 files and they each have a little cloud to the left side of them. When I click on it, it says file cannot be found. And then it has a little Microsoft Edge thing. So I cannot. I
No,
do
you're
not.
fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Everything's fine.
Okay, so how much time do you have to work on these though?
Yeah, I already plan to take time after, so I have nothing. I'm gonna sit here and do this.
Yeah, I just can't figure it out. It has a little cloud and then, but she created it in Nevada Water at live.com in the OneDrive. And I can't, if I try to pull it up, it says file cannot be found. So
Yeah, that's
I'm gonna send you a picture of what not to do
okay. I like it.
for the future. Let's see, it looks like someone just joined us. Derek, are you just now joining us?
I am,
Hi, Derek.
yes.
Hi, are you just joining us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, we just ended, my friend. Started at 3.
Shucks. Okay. Yep. Sorry, I got wrapped up and stuff, and I was like, oh no.
That's
Okay.
okay. We will post the presentation in PDF format on the NWA website. Just use the events tab across the black bar and in the drop-down options, choose past events and you'll be able to find it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Hey, you are so welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yep. All right.
Okay, have a good
Bye-bye.
night.
Bye.
Okay, so if you look at what I just sent you, that's not how to create your folders. I can't figure out how she did it because it happened with some letters too that she was working on and sent them to me. And just, well, the same thing with that Excel spreadsheet. Oh, shoot.